and thank you for going on to inspire so many young people. To all the supporters here today.
Certain parts of the media, news media, would portray of him being slightly sort of irascible was.
For 18 years, the most important pages about Prince Edward's future were blacked out, sealed inside the Land Registry, and every question about them met the same wall of legal silence. Then, in autumn 2025, that silence cracked. Legal and political pressure forced open a redacted royal deal signed back in 2007. And the papers inside do not just explain how the least examined royal lives. They lock in what happens to him next, for the rest of his life and long after it. What that sealed file reveals is the exact reason it was never meant to be read. The Forgotten Brother. Before you can understand why those pages were sealed, you need to understand the man they protect. Because for most of his adult life, Prince Edward was treated as the footnote of his generation.
If anybody's going to get married, I hope that they think that they're going to get it right. So, and as I said, I mean, it's, you know, we're the very best of friends. And
the youngest of Queen Elizabeth II's 4 children, he left the Royal Marines in 1987 before completing commando training, and the tabloids never let him forget it. His television company, Ardent Productions, struggled for years before he wound it down and stepped into full-time royal duties in the early 2000s. Compare that to his siblings. Charles was the heir, endlessly scrutinized. Anne was the respected workhorse. Andrew was the war hero turned scandal. Edward was simply there, dutiful at the engagements, never interesting enough to sell a front page.
Ultimately, I really have to thank the contestants who've given of their time and their energy and their humor.
But being underestimated inside an institution like the monarchy gives you something nobody talks about. It gives you room to plan, to build, to make decisions nobody bothers to examine until decades later. And in March 1998, Edward made a decision that looked like a minor property arrangement. Nobody in the press gave it a second look. No cameras, no headlines, just signatures and paperwork. 27 years later, investigators would be fighting to see the paperwork it produced. The abandoned mansion picture, Bagshot Park, as it was in the late 1990s. A 120-room mansion in Surrey, built in 1879 for Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught, one of Queen Victoria's sons. Red brick and stone in the Tudor Gothic style, sitting on 51 acres within the designated area of Windsor Great Park. Grade 2, listed, dripping with history. And almost nobody wanted it. After the Second World War, the house had been used by the Royal Army chaplains, and when the Ministry of Defense handed it back to the Crown Estate in 1996, the building needed serious work. Proposals were considered to turn the property into a hotel or a conference center. That is how the institution valued one of the great royal houses of England, not as a family seat, as a business opportunity waiting for a buyer. Then the Queen's youngest son stepped forward. In March 1998, after detailed negotiations, the Crown Estate leased Bagshot Park to Edward for 50 years, at an initial rent of £5,000 a year, with one enormous condition attached. The place had to be restored, and Edward would have to carry a serious share of that burden himself. Most people would have walked away. Edward signed. That signature is page 1 of the sealed file investigators would fight over 27 years later, the first document in a paper trail the institution would one day wish it could read in full. And what that signature cost him is where this story starts getting uncomfortable for everyone who ever dismissed him. Before we open that bill, do one thing for me. If sealed files, redacted pages, and the money trails behind this family are your kind of story, subscribe and turn notifications on right now, because the number you are about to hear is the reason the palace never wanted this file discussed, and the chapter after that is the deal they actually redacted. The price of entry. The restoration was originally estimated at just over £2 million. By the time it was finished, according to a National Audit Office report on the transaction, the final cost had reached roughly £2.98 million. The Crown Estate paid £1.6 million of that. The rest, an estimated £1.36 to £1.38 million, came from Edward himself. Private money spent on a property he did not own to bring a state asset back to life. And once the work was done, His rent did exactly what the agreement said it would. It rose to £90,000 a year, a figure the National Audit Office described as consistent with market value, subject to reviews every 15 years. Sit with that for a second. A member of the royal family paying market rate, confirmed by the government's own. Spending watchdog on a house he had personally helped rescue from becoming a conference center. For 9 years, that was the arrangement. Clean, documented, boring. The kind of file an auditor closes with a nod. Then, in 2007, Edward did something with that file that nobody outside a small circle would fully understand for almost 2 decades. It is the deal at the heart of the redacted pages, and it changed his future permanently. The master stroke. Through a company called Eclipse Nominees Limited, which is listed as the official leaseholder, Edward reportedly paid a premium of £5 million to the Crown estate. In exchange, the lease on Bagshot Park was extended to 150 years. 150 years. That is not a housing arrangement. That is a dynasty-length commitment, running generations beyond Edward's own lifetime. Reporting on the deal indicates the premium was market-tested, and that in exchange for that upfront payment, the ongoing rent became a peppercorn, a token amount that satisfies the legal contract, while the real value had already been paid at the front. And the terms went further. The lease permits subletting, and for years the stable block at Bagshot was rented out to a third party, an arrangement that reportedly continued until 2020 and generated private income. Reporting also indicates there are no restrictions preventing the sale of the lease itself, meaning the arrangement Edward secured carries real, transferable value. Now here is the part that mattered most in autumn 2025. When the Times examined the Land Registry records, key details of the 2007 deal were redacted, blacked out. The full structure stayed sealed for nearly 2 decades. And through all those years, the deal did exactly what it was built to do. Nobody announced it, nobody celebrated it. It simply sat there, working. But sealed pages have a habit of becoming the story. And while this one sat in the dark, something else was happening to Edward in full public view. Something his parents had planned for him since before his wedding day. His father's name. Prince Philip had carried the title Duke of Edinburgh for more than 70 years. It was not just an honor, it was the frame of his entire public life. The name attached to the Duke of Edinburgh Award, a scheme that has shaped millions of young lives across the world, his patronages, his identity. And it was well understood within the family that Philip and the Queen wanted that title to pass, eventually, to their youngest son. The plan was developed during their lifetimes, and it was publicly signaled as far back as Edward's wedding in 1999. Philip died in April 2021. The Queen followed in September 2022. And for months afterward, royal watchers openly questioned whether King Charles III, now the man who controlled the title, would actually honor the understanding. A slimmed-down monarchy was the stated direction. Fewer titles, fewer working royals, tighter control. Then, on the 10th of March, 2023, Edward's 59th birthday, the palace announced it. Edward was created Duke of Edinburgh. His son James took his old title, becoming Earl of Wessex. There was one notable limit. The dukedom was conferred for Edward's lifetime only, not as a hereditary title. The promise his parents made was kept, and it was kept the same way everything else in Edward's life was kept, in writing. But there was one more gift from his mother sitting inside this family, and it was resting on his wife's head. The Queen's gift. When Sophie married Edward at St. George's Chapel in June 1999, the Queen gave her a wedding tiara from her own private collection, reworked for the occasion by the crown jeweler of the time, David Thomas. It became known as the Anthemion tiara, and its origins have never been officially confirmed, but jewelry historians widely believe its 4 diamond elements once belonged to Queen Victoria's regal circlet, a piece dating back to 1859. Unlike the grand loans handed to other royal women, this one was Sophie's to keep. She wore it again and again at royal weddings across Europe and state occasions at home, and had it redesigned for her in 2019 by jeweler Harry Collins. A personal gift, given outright, worn for a quarter of a century without challenge. Notice the pattern forming, the house, secured by contract. The title, delivered in a formal announcement. The tiara, given as personal property. Piece by piece, Edward's world was being built out of things that could, not simply be taken back. And in the autumn of 2025, that pattern was about to face its first real stress test. The files open. The trigger was Andrew. In autumn 2025, reporting revealed that he had been paying only a peppercorn rent on Royal Lodge for decades, while questions swirled about who had funded the property's upkeep. Members of Parliament demanded answers about whether the Crown estate was achieving value for money. Suddenly, every royal lease was radioactive, and investigators turned to the one file that had stayed stubbornly sealed: Bagshot Park, the one lease nobody had managed to read. This is the moment the hook of this story becomes real. Legal and political pressure in 2025 forced more of the 2007 deal into the open. The redacted pages started giving up their contents. Documents that had spent 18 years in the dark were suddenly being read line by line by reporters, auditors, and MPs hunting for the next Royal Lodge. And what they revealed told two very different stories about two very different brothers. A National Audit Office document showed that Edward had paid market value for his home until at least 2007, the point at which his £5 million premium restructured the deal. He had funded his own share of the restoration. He had paid his rent through the years when it mattered, without complaint and without scandal. And by then, with the working family smaller than it had been in living memory, Edward and Sophie had become two of its most heavily relied upon members, absorbing duties that once belonged to half a dozen royals. Critics still raised fair questions. Should any royal hold estate property on a token rent, even after a market-tested upfront payment? Should profits from subletting flow to a private household rather than the treasury? Those debates are legitimate, and they are still running. But notice what was never in dispute. Every element of Edward's arrangement was negotiated, documented, and signed with the Crown estate itself. Whatever anyone thinks of the terms, the institution agreed to them, took the money, and banked it. So the file everyone expected to be a scandal turned out to be something far stranger. It turned out to be a guarantee. The final page. Because look at what those unsealed papers actually lock in about Edward's future. A 150-year lease on one of the great houses of England, secured with his own money through his own company, with rights to sublet and reportedly no restriction on selling the lease. A restoration verified by the government's own auditors. A title his parents planned across decades, delivered by the king himself. A personal gift from the late Queen resting securely with his wife. That is what makes him untouchable, and it only needs saying once. When the pressure arrived, the answers were already sitting in the file, signed and dated, some of them going back to 1998. Auditors can question the terms, Parliament can debate the principle, but the deal stands because signatures outlast sentiment, and Edward understood that before anyone thought to watch him. His father spent 70 years defining what the Edinburgh name could mean. His mother spent her final years making sure the plan survived her, and Edward spent nearly 3 decades reading the paperwork, paying the bills, and waiting for a day exactly like the one in autumn 2025, when strangers finally pulled his file expecting a scandal and found a fortress instead. Every question they brought had already been answered years earlier, in ink. So here is the question to leave you with, and I genuinely want your answer. Was Edward simply the lucky beneficiary of parents who protected him, or is he the most quietly strategic royal of the modern era? Drop your answer in the comments and subscribe with notifications on, because this family is heading into more financial scrutiny, not less. More files are going to be forced open, and you are going to want to be here when they are.